We live as if our eyes deliver an unedited feed of the world, as if sight is a passive recorder of events. That belief is convenient and comfortable, but it is false. The world you call real is not raw. It is a constructed theater assembled by perception. The mind is the playwright, the director, and the editor. It stages scenes from an overwhelming flow of sensation, chooses which actors to spotlight, and then produces a narrative that explains why things are happening. This narrative is powerful, more powerful than most of us imagine, because we take the script for the world itself. Consider the simplest experience: sitting in traffic and feeling the rise of annoyance. What happens? A car cuts you off. You feel a sting of anger. Immediately a story begins. They're careless. This is going to make me late. This city is full of reckless drivers. That story, once told, changes your posture, your breathing, your face. You become a character in the narrative, and your body moves accordingly. The world responds to you in kind. Someone honks, a red light lingers, your day becomes colored by the script your mind authored in a moment. The traffic didn't change. Your perception did. The mind turned raw input into a drama, and then lived inside it. This staging function has survival value. Evolution favors systems that simplify complexity, that reduce noise into patterns that aid decision-making. But simplification is not truth. It is an economical fiction. The writer in your head uses a few signposts, prior experiences, cultural categories, habitual affect, to produce a coherent scene. Coherence feels like accuracy, and accuracy feels like safety. Once you believe the play, you defend it. You will seek confirming evidence, ignore disconfirming scenes, and edit memory to make the narrative tighter. So the mind not only scripts a scene, it rewrites the past to make the present more plausible. Memory becomes an accomplice to perception's theater. The consequence is that many people experience a life organized by stories they never chose. A child of scarcity learns a plot where resources are perpetually scarce and carries it into adulthood. A person who was betrayed becomes a chronic author of suspicion. These are not just personality traits. They are the bedrock scripts that shape careers, relationships, and health. They are not the world. They are the mind's representation of it. Yet we treat them as if they were the world's unvarnished demands. There is liberation in noticing the theatricality. If the mind stages reality, it can also be taught new scripts. The first step is curiosity, noticing the way you edit. Ask yourself, what am I telling myself about this moment? What did I leave out? Where is the camera fixed? Without judgment, observe. You will find that much of what you habitually narrate is either old material or borrowed lines from other people. It may have been adaptive in some season, but it is no longer required. Second, regard perception as selective, not comprehensive. Train a habit of seeking disconfirming details. If you hold a belief that you are always overlooked, deliberately look for moments of acknowledgement. Small, routine ones you ordinarily pass by. This is not whimsy. It is a corrective training for your perceptual muscles. Over time, the field your mind chooses to spotlight widens. The actors with speaking parts change. The drama becomes less constricting. Third, practice narrative authorship rather than passive consumption. When events occur, try writing 2 plausible narratives and see which one leads to more resourceful action. If someone criticizes you, one story is, they think I'm incompetent. Another is, they want better from the project. One narrows. The other permits collaboration. Which script makes for a healthier day? You will start recognizing that your life is as much chosen by your scripts as by external facts. Lastly, remember that the theater of perception is both creative and moral. The way you narrate your world affects others. When you interpret someone's silence as malice and react accordingly, you create the very distance you feared. When you interpret it as tiredness and offer warmth, you often find that connection returns. The mind's theater is therefore not just private art, it is social architecture. By changing the script you run, you alter the relational field you inhabit. Perception is not a mistake to be corrected once. It is a craft to be refined. The mind will always tell stories. The question is which stories you allow to run the show. Choose ones that expand possibility, not ones that narrow it. Teach your mind to be a kinder playwright, and the stage of your life will change with it. Long before GPS, travelers relied on maps, simple instruments that represent the land. We call them maps because they stand in for what's there. But maps are only representations, lines on paper that point at rivers, dashed symbols that indicate marsh. If a traveler mistakes a map for the territory itself, they stop exploring. They obey ink rather than soil. The same error occurs in the mind when beliefs become maps that we mistake for the land. Beliefs are shorthand models. You grew them out of experiences, training, and instruction. People are mostly selfish. I must be perfect to be loved. The world is dangerous. These are all maps drawn to help you navigate complexity. They are useful when they are provisional. In many cases, X is true. But when useful calcifies into always true, the map ossifies into a prison. Labels are part of the problem. We label ourselves introvert, failure, survivor, and then treat those labels as identity. Labels stabilize perception, but they can also truncate potential. A label like not a public speaker becomes a permission structure that disallows practice. The label says, stop trying. You have a limitation. The curious mind removes the fossilization by adding context. When, how, and in which conditions does the label apply? The map becomes more detailed. You regain routes to traverse. The danger is psychological invisibility. Once a belief is accepted as reality, it organizes attention and recruits confirming evidence. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You are not just thinking the belief. You are arranging life to match it. The courageous work is to test the map, step into territories the map said were impossible. Bring an experimental mind. If your map said, I will always fail interviews, take low-stakes interviews and track outcomes. Often the map will be revealed as a simplification that no longer serves. Cartography of self also requires humility. Your map was drawn by a younger you with less data. Honor the map's origins, it was probably adaptive once. But also recognize that maps are made for travel, not imprisonment. Where have you stopped traveling because the ink told you the way is blocked? Which labels have you internalized that can be loosened by adding new experiences, new contrary data? One practical technique: practice belief auditing. Weekly, pick one belief and treat it as a hypothesis, not a dogma. Write down the evidence for and against. Create a small test that might disconfirm the belief. Record results. You are not seeking to prove yourself wrong for the sake of contradiction. You are testing the map's fidelity to current reality. Another strategy is to diversify your cartography. Read widely. Live in small discomforts of new culture. Listen to people whose maps were drawn in different soils. Exposure to varied maps widens your own cartographic imagination. The world is bigger than your original lines. Finally, remember the moral dimension. Maps influence the communities you form. If your map says scarcity, you will behave competitively and reinforce scarcity for others. If your map opens to abundance, you will trust and thereby create cooperative systems. Changing your map is therefore an act of social restoration. Maps are necessary. Maps are not the end. They are tools to be revised. Keep the map pliable so you may continue the journey. Beneath the stories and maps lies a set of cognitive machines: attention, memory, and predictive habit. These are not metaphors. They are operating systems that run your experience. They economize energy and create stability. They also create illusions when their algorithms remain unexamined. Attention is the gatekeeper. Whatever you attend to becomes salient. The mind cannot process everything, so attention chooses. It is guided by novelty, threat, and reward history. When your attention habitually lingers on scarcity, fears, or slights, those elements gain disproportionate weight in your experience. The simple practice of redirecting attention, deliberately choosing a different anchor, changes the distribution of salience. You are not denying reality. You are reallocating your cognitive bandwidth. Memory is reconstructive, not archival. Neuroscience shows that memory is built when you recall, and each recall slightly modifies the memory. That is why two people remember the same event differently. Because memory is malleable, it often supports the mind's current narrative. You will recall past events in ways that fit your present belief. This is not nefarious. It's adaptive. The brain prefers coherence. But it means that your past is not a fixed ledger. It is a living fabric that you can alter by how you retrieve and reinterpret it. Predictive habit is the most consequential of these machines. The brain is a predictive organ. It constantly anticipates what will happen next based on past data. Prediction saves time. You don't have to reinterpret every footstep. But prediction also fills in blanks. often with conservative guesses that match prior experience, not current possibility. Predictive habit makes the mind efficient but sometimes wrong. You expect rejection, so you perceive neutral cues as dismissal. You expect failure, so ambiguous outcomes are read as confirmation. These three, attention, memory, prediction, combine to create a stable but sometimes distorted reality. But because they are processes, they can be tinkered with. Attention can be trained with small practices, single-tasking windows, breath anchors, and sensory noticing exercises. Memory can be reshaped by deliberate retrieval practices, journaling with an emphasis on nuance, reframing events to highlight learning, and gratitude practices that expand the palette of remembered goods. Predictive habit can be loosened by calibrated exposure, deliberately trying small behaviors where the predicted catastrophe is unlikely. Each non-catastrophic violation of expectation loosens the prediction's grip. One specific technique is prediction testing. Before a social encounter, write down what you predict will happen. After the encounter, compare predictions to outcomes. More often than not, the world will be less catastrophic or more ambiguous than your prediction. This repeated test reduces the habit of anticipatory catastrophizing. Another practice addresses memory reconstruction, episodic enrichment. Each week, choose one neutral or difficult memory and write it with sensory detail and multiple perspectives, including context that softens blame and highlights complexity. Over time, your reconstructed past becomes a more fertile field for present action. In short, the machinery of illusion is not mystical. It is evolutionary engineering. Learn its parts and you stop being a passive subject of automatic edits. You become an informed user, capable of resetting defaults and choosing new configurations. Projection is simple and profound. What you refuse to acknowledge in yourself, you see in others. The shadow is that subterranean collection of impulses, grudges, envies, and fears we push away because they are uncomfortable or shameful. When unintegrated, the shadow turns into a projector, casting its content outward and convincing you that the problem is elsewhere. The world then appears as an enemy when in many cases it is a mirror. Projection plays out in relationships constantly. The colleague you label arrogant may be reflecting your unowned ambition. The friend you call needy may show traits you deny in yourself. The political enemy you call corrupt might reflect the unexamined compromises you have made. Projection simplifies complexity by externalizing pain. It protects identity in the short term but corrodes connection and clarity in the long run. Integrating. The shadow is less glamorous than it sounds because it involves facing parts of yourself that your culture told you to hide. It requires radical honesty. You must be willing to notice the exact circumstances that trigger you and then ask, what is this reaction teaching me about myself? A useful ritual is trigger mapping. When you are activated, pause and record the event. What was said, how you felt, what story arose, and what bodily sensations accompanied the reaction. Over time, patterns emerge. Certain comments align with the childhood scene, certain criticisms echo a parent's voice. The map points to the shadow material. Integration is not all inward alone. It calls for corrective action in the world. If envy shows up, transform its energy into admiration and learning. Reach out, ask for guidance. If avoidance shows up, plan a concrete small exposure. The point is to convert unowned energy into constructive movement. There is also a communal dimension. Projection is contagious in groups. When a team scapegoats a member, the scapegoating often masks collective anxiety. Institutionalizing practices of feedback, repair, and reflective ritual reduces scapegoating. Groups that practice shadow integration, admitting failure, naming feelings without judgment, repairing quickly, produce far more adaptive systems. Culturally, we valorize the light and fear the dark, but maturity is the marriage of both. The genius of integration is that the shadow contains energy. In wrestling it into visibility, you free that energy for purposeful use. Something creative often emerges where repression had kept potential frozen. Finally, compassion is central. When you notice projection, start with curiosity, not moralization. The practice is gentle but relentless. Name the pattern, own the part, design one small corrective. Over time, fewer projections will populate your world and more real conversations will occur. Projection is a deception of perception. Integration is an act of liberation. When you reclaim your shadow, the world stops being an enemy and starts being a workshop. Knowing that the mind edits reality is one thing, doing something about it is another. Recalibration requires practical methods you can repeat until they become a new default. Here are reliable, accessible practices that interrupt habitual editing and let more accurate fields of experience emerge. Sensory grounding. The fastest way out of a narrative loop is the body. Use 5 senses exercises. Name 5 things you see, 4 you feel, 3 you hear, 2 you smell, 1 you taste. This interrupts spirals and returns you to raw data. Do it habitually whenever you feel swept into a story. Naming and noting. Borrowed from contemplative practices, naming mental events reduces their grip. Say to yourself, there is worry, there is a judgment, there is craving. The simple verbal label creates cognitive distance and allows choice. Narrative rehearsal. Pick one constricting story you often run. Write it out in full. Then write an alternative possible story that is plausible and resourceful. Rehearse the alternative mentally and in small acts. The mind learns language and pattern. Rehearsal makes it real. Prediction testing. As above. Before high-stakes situations, write your predictions and rate their probability. After the event, check accuracy. Over time, predictive bias loosens. Micro-exposure. For fears and avoidance, do one small action that gently violates the fear's prediction. It should be visible but not catastrophic. Accumulative tiny disconfirmations change expectation. Memory enrichment. When retrieving past events, include context, other perspectives, and mitigating factors. Avoid simple villain-victim binaries. Richer memory produces less reactive present. Attention diet, curate inputs. Limit news, social scrolls, and sensational media during vulnerable periods. Replace with a short list of high-nourish inputs, a trusted essay, a quiet podcast, a nature walk. Somatic practices. Daily breath work, short movement sequences, and consistent sleep lock and regulation. A well-regulated nervous system is less prone to catastrophic predictions. Reflective communities. Join a small group that practices honest feedback and ritual repair. The social mirror is essential for correcting blind spots. Apology and repair routines. When you act from faulty perceptions, have a quick repair script. Name the misperception, apologize concisely, and state corrective steps. Quick repair restores trust and reduces the cost of occasional misreadings. These practices are not magical. They are disciplined interventions that progressively rewire the mind's defaults. Start with 2 and practice daily. The mind values repetition and context. Provide both. Recalibration also requires patience. The brain prefers familiar narratives. New pathways need time and repetition. Be methodical. Short, consistent practices win over occasional heroic efforts. Lastly, keep a journal of tiny wins. Note when a practiced interruption produced a better outcome. Over months, the evidence of change encourages further practice. Your mind will start offering you truer fields. The illusion will thin. If perceptual recalibration is successful, something remarkable happens. Your outer life starts to change not because external conditions became magically kinder, but because your actions shift in stable, potent ways. The world responds to different agents. A person who sees more clearly navigates relationships with less drama, works with more focus, and makes decisions that compound advantage. First, notice behavior changes. When you no longer treat every ambiguous face as rejection, you show up more consistently. People respond to dependability. When you pause before reacting, conversations change tone. Your calmer presence reduces escalation. These micro-behavioral shifts alter social feedback loops and over time yield different relational ecologies. Second, your work changes. A mind less hijacked by inner noise produces better focus and deeper craftsmanship. Projects that required endurance now get consistent attention. You can sustain long-form creation because you are less tempted by the mind's performative distractions. Output quality rises and, importantly, so does your capacity to repair mistakes quickly, a key trait in durable success. Third, risk tolerance calibrates. When you test predictions and accumulate small disconfirmations, you gain reliable evidence that the world is not always catastrophic. That evidence builds courage to pursue meaningful risks. Calculated risks lead to trajectories change, career shifts, new collaborations, creative projects. The matured mind does not gamble blindly. It experiments wisely. Fourth, legacy thinking emerges. A clearer mind sees beyond immediate discomfort to systemic possibilities. You invest in people, institutions, and practices that outlast you. You teach apprentices, you design rituals, you write that manual. You fund that community practice. The ripple effects of small interior shifts therefore become generational. But translation also requires humility. Not all outer problems yield to inner change alone. Structural obstacles, social, economic, systemic injustice, need collective action and policy. The matured mind recognizes where individual recalibration helps and where collective leverage is necessary. It refuses solipsistic mind fixes everything rhetoric and chooses both. Inner mastery where useful, collective action where required. Finally, keep the practice alive. Perception can relapse into old scripts under stress. Embed recalibration into your life as routine. Weekly reviews, monthly retreats, accountability partners. Make ritual of repair communal, so that the field you inhabit supports ongoing clarity. When the mind stops manufacturing false reality and begins to see with fidelity, the life you act into is not an illusion. It is a newly possible reality, shaped by clearer choices, steadier attention, and kinder narratives. The world does not change because illusion fades. It changes because your actions, now less reactive and more creative, alter relationships, institutions, and trajectories. Your mind is not a neutral lens. It is an active architect. Hone it, question it, practice on it. When you do, the world will stop being an enemy of meaning and begin to answer to your steadier, wiser presence.